about lists and keys. Firstly, let's recap. In the previous session, we understood about components. We have seen how to create a component. Then we understood that components are reusable. We also understood that components are composable. That is, we can make use of one component in another component, right? So then we understood about props. We have seen how to pass props to a component and how to access the props in the component. So then we have seen about how to create React app for a complex applications. So the initial project setup, and we have seen how to start the application. Right. So regarding today's session, in today's session, we'll understand about lists, about how to render the list, and we'll also understand about keys, about adding a unique key and a key attribute. Okay, so to set the code program for today's session, you need to run this command. So with this, the necessary resources will be downloaded, and then run npm install command. With this, all the dependencies required will be installed. Okay, so now let's build a user list application in this manner. Okay, so user list application, this is a very common thing among a lot of websites, right? So that could be Facebook, Twitter, where we'll be seeing the list of user profiles, the list of users. There's a very common requirement we'll have in a lot of websites. Okay, so let's build this user list application. Okay, so here you can see there are various user profiles. Okay, that one thing with the image and the name and the role, you can call that a user profile, right? Like this, we have multiple user profiles. So if you observe them, right? So the data is varying, whereas the way that we are displaying is the same. So let's create a user profile component. So based on the data, so the user profile will get created. Okay, so let's create a component called user profile, to which we'll pass the data as props, and appropriately it will create the profile of the user. Okay, so let's do that. So firstly, let's build a single user profile. We'll start with a single user profile. Okay, so and then we'll create list of user profiles. Okay, so let's start with a single user profile. So firstly, let's understand the data required to build this user profile. So there you can see we have image, there's name, there's role, right? So the data corresponding to this is the image URL, name, and role. So let's create an object for this. So let's call that user details object. So in which we have image URL, name, and role. Okay, so this data, this user details, will be passing as props to the profile component, user profile component. So we'll create a user profile component, so which will take the user details as props, and then based on the user details, appropriately, the user profile component will create the profile of the user, right? That entire thing it will create. Okay, so the user details will be sent as props to the user profile component, and it will create the profile of the user. Okay, clear? So these are the steps involved. Okay, so firstly, let's add the user details into app.js file. So generally we maintain the data in the app.js file. So let's add the user details to the app.js file. Okay, there you can see. So we are done adding that. Okay, so let's do this. And then we'll again go back. So here you can see, right? So in source directory, we have app.js file. So in the app.js file, we'll be adding the data. So click on allow. Okay, so here we are going to add the data. So constant user details equal to, it's an object, so where we'll be providing the image URL. So and also we need name, okay, and then the role. Okay, so firstly for the image URL, so you have a resource.md file at the end. So if you open that, so here you can see there are various assets available, image URL links. Okay, just make use of that. So I'll provide a URL, just a sample image. So let me give some name, say Pranita, in this manner, and then let's say role as software engineer. Okay, so in this manner, so we have provided the image URL, name, and role. So this is the data that we need to profile to build a user profile component, right? So we are done giving this data, and we have added it in the app.js file. Okay, so adding the data is done. So now let's create the user profile component. Okay, so let's do that. So for this, firstly, in the source directory, let's create a components folder. Okay, so generally we'll be following a folder structure for better organization of the components that we create. Okay, so within the source directory, we'll be creating a components directory. So in the components directory, we'll create a folder with the name of the component that we are going to add. Okay, so right now we are going to create a user profile component. So let's add a directory, user profile. So there you can see it's a component, so it should start with a capital letter. So that's the reason we have U as capital. So user profile. Okay, so this we'll create this folder, and within that folder we'll create an index.js file. So in the index.js file, we'll be adding the user profile component. Okay, so let's do these steps first. Okay, so here we have the source directory. So within the source directory, firstly, let's create a new folder, right click, then you'll get a thing like this, and then click on new folder, and then let's write components. Okay, so within the components directory, we want to create another new folder, so which is the name of the component that we want to create, which is user profile. So we have created this directory. So now in the user profile directory, we'll create an index.js file. Okay, So now in the index.js file, we'll be adding the user component. Okay. So we are done creating this folder structure. Within the source, we have the components directory. In the components directory, we have user profile. And in the user profile, we have index.js, where we are going to start writing the user profile component. So there you can see, right? So we have written const user profile equal to, it's an arrow function, which has to return a JSX element. So there you can see we have the JSX element. It just looks like the HTML, right? It's exactly the HTML code that we'll write. So there's a div element. So within the div, we are adding an image element. So initially, we are adding some dummy URL, right? So we'll directly set a URL right now. So later on, based on the props that we pass, we'll update it. Okay, so right now we'll just give a URL there. Okay, so then we have to export this user profile so that we can use it somewhere else. Okay, so firstly, let's create this user profile component and export it so that we can use it somewhere else. Okay, so let's do these steps. So in the index.js file, so within the user profile directory, there's index.js. So here we are going to start creating our user profile component. So firstly, constant user profile. This is the name of the component. As we understood, it should start with a capital letter. So it's starting with a capital letter. So here it's nothing but an arrow function, which has to return a JSX element. So the JSX element that we want to return is, so there is a div container. So within the div container, we want to create an image element. Okay, so in the image element, so we have to provide the URL. So right now we'll give a URL. So later on, we will update this with the props that we pass. Okay, so right now just let's give a URL. So here we have a list of URLs. Let's just take one. And then I'm providing that here. Okay, I'm providing the URL here. Clear? So this is done. So there you can see, right? So the user profile, we have created this component. So now we have to make use of this component somewhere else, right? So for that, we have to export this. So as we understood in the React.js, so the modules are ES6 modules, though the extension is .js, so it's ES6 modules. So to export the module, we use the export keyword, export. Since this is the only component that we are writing, so we can make use of the default exports. So export, default, and we'll write the component name, which is user profile. So we are done exporting this component too. Okay, so now let's go back. So we are done with these steps. Now let's proceed further. So now in the app.js file, we'll import this component. We'll import the user profile component. Okay, so there you can see the command. Since it's ES6 modules, we use the import keyword, import, and we want to import the user profile component. So we are specifying that we are going to import that from the components directory user profile and index module, right? From the index module in the user profile, which is present in the components directory, we are importing the user profile. Okay. Clear? So we are done importing that. So next in the app, we are specifying it to render the user profile. Okay, so we want to render the user profile. We are specifying that there near the app. Okay, so with this, the user profile component will be rendered. Okay, so you can run npm start and then you'll be able to see an output in this manner. Okay, so let's try this out. So we are done creating the user profile component now. Okay, so a temporary one, we'll update it later. So we have exported it. So next in the app.js file, okay, so we'll import this user profile component. Okay, so for that we write import, and the component that we want to import is user profile. So we'll specify that, and we want to import that from /components/ and then user profile. So /user profile. So / in that from index.js. So we are importing the user profile. We just need to specify index here. Okay. So with this, the user profile component will get imported. So now we want to render this, right? So for that, you can directly just specify it here. Okay. In this manner. So with this, the user profile component will get rendered. So let's have a look at the output. So for that, firstly, we need to start the server application. So npm start. So I'm running this. So with this, the server will get started. Okay, there you can see the development server is starting. Okay, and then once we navigate to localhost :3000, we'll be able to see the output. So here you might get some warnings in this manner. We'll later on resolve these warnings too. Okay, so now let's have a look at the output. So localhost :3000. Okay, so there you can see the output, right? We have given a URL. So with this, the image has been created here. Okay, so this step is done. Okay, so now let's come back. Okay. So we are done with this and we have seen this output, right? Now let's proceed further. So right now what we have done, we have given a URL, right? By default, we have hard coded a URL. So now let's update that with the data that we have going to pass, right? So we want to pass some data. So we'll pass them as props. So for that, there you can see the syntax. So we'll write user details equal to, and we'll give the value, which is nothing but the user details object that we have added previously, right? Within the curly braces, we are embedding that variable. So in this way, we are passing the user details as props to the user profile component. So now to access this props, so we'll write the props as the parameter for the user profile component, and using object destruction, we can access the user details there. Okay, so from the user details, we right now just need the image URL. So using object destruction, let's access the image URL there. Okay, so there you can see. So we got the image URL, right? So previously we have hard-coded a URL. Let's replace that with the image URL that we got from the props. Okay, so there you can see. So within the curly braces, we have mentioned the variable. Okay, clear? So then you will get an output in this manner. Okay, so now let's try this out. So here you can see that we have user profile, right? So for this, we want to pass this user details object as props. Okay, so for that, user details is a prop name equal to. So then we'll pass this object, so which is user details, as the props. So we are done passing the props, right? So now we have to access this props in the user profile component. So here you can the props will be passed as a parameter to this, right? So then we can make use of it here. So firstly, we have to convert this into a functional block, okay, and write return here, since we are going to access the props and do the various things, right? So that's the reason you have to convert this in this manner. So then let's access the props, okay? So user details from the props, okay? So in the user details also, we just need the image URL, right? So let's just access that first, okay? Image URL using object destruction. I'm just accessing the image URL. Okay, so I'm done specifying that. So the image URL that we have accessed, so that we have to specify it here. Previously, we just have given some dummy URL, right? But right now, we want to make use of the props and appropriately create the user profile, right? So now let's specify that image URL here. Okay, so we'll embed this image URL here. Okay, so this step is also done. Okay, so let's ignore these warnings for now. So we are done with specifying this. Let's have a look at the output. Okay. So there you can see, right? So you can change the URL there and appropriately you can see the result. Okay. So now let's come back here. So we are done with this step, right? So the next thing is, right, we'll create an index.css file. So in the index.css file, we can add all the styling that we want to include, right? In the class names, we can add that in the index.css file, and that file we can import into the index.js file so that we can make use of these class names in the JSX. Okay, there you can see. So we have created an index.css file. We are importing that. So then, and for the div, right? So in the JSX element for the div, we want to write the class name as user card container. And for the image, we want the image to be circular in this manner. There you can see in the output. So there also we want the class name to be avatar. Okay, so we want it to be circular in that manner. So for that, we'll specify the class name as avatar. Okay, so let's do these steps and have a look at the output. So now we want to add the CSS, right? So for that, let's create an index.css file here in the user profile folder itself. We'll create an index.css file. Okay, so now the styling that we want to add, we'll add that in the index.css file. So already the styling that we want to achieve, so the related classes are available for you in the resources.md file. So here you can see user profile /index.css. So let's copy these things. Okay, so I'm copying all the classes into the index.css file. Okay, so now to make use of these classes, we have to first import them into the index.js file. So for that, we need to write an import statement, import, and then we have to provide the path, which is /index.css. So I've specified it. Now we can make use of the class names that we have specified in this index.css file. So now let's specify them. So for this container, we want the class name. We want some styling. So the class name for it is, so in the index.css, you can see user card container. Okay, so we want to specify that here. Okay. So we are done specifying. Similarly, for the image, we want that to be circular. So for that, the class name that we want to provide is avatar. Okay, so you can have a look at the index.css. So here you can see. Okay, so we are done specifying these class names. Okay, now let's have a look at the output. So here you can see that. Okay, so the image is circular. All this styling has been applied. Okay, so this step is also done. Okay, so we're done with adding an image with a circular styling, all this, right? So now let's keep on adding the remaining things, that is the name, the role, right? So for that, let's have a container which will hold the user details. So user details container, and within that we are adding the heading element where it'll add the name of it. So firstly, how do we get the name? From the user details. So from the props, we have accessed the user details. In the user details, we have name. So let's first get that through object destruction. So there you can see. Then within the JSX element, we are embedding that name so that it will appropriately be displayed. Okay, so this step is clear, right? Let's try to do this. So now adding the image is done. Next we have some user details that we want to add. So let's do that. So firstly we'll add a container, okay, which will hold the user details. So we have some styling for that. So the class name is in the index.css, you can go here. So it's user details container. So let's add that here, okay. So I'm done specifying that. And within this user details container, firstly, we want the name. So for that, we'll use a heading element. So then the styling for this is, so in the CSS, you can have a look at it, user name. Okay, we'll add that styling. So coming to the heading is a name that we'll get from the props, right? So for that, firstly, we need to access it. Okay, so the name from here. So then we have to embed that here. Okay. So we are done with this, and there you can see there are just simple warnings, that's fine. So we are done with these steps. So let's have a look at it. So there you can see the output, right? So we have the image and then there's name, right? I've given Pranita, so that's the reason we got Pranita here, okay? So we are done with this step. Okay. So now let's proceed further. Let's add role also. Firstly, we need to access that detail from the user detail. So we got role, right? So then we are embedding there. Below we have added a paragraph element. So then we embedded the role. There's some styling user designation. We added that class. Okay. So let's do these steps. So we are done adding the name. Similarly, let's add the role. So it's a paragraph element. Okay. So and then coming to the class styling, it's a class name equal to. So here in the index.css, at the end we have user designation. So we are going to add that class. So I'm copying that, I'm adding it here. So now coming to the value. So firstly, we need to get that from the user details. Okay, so here role. So we are extracting it from the user details and that we'll embed here in the JSX element. Okay, so we are done embedding. So there you can see, right? So there are just few warnings, you can ignore that. So if there are errors, then you should be careful. So then it won't be rendered. So here you can see the final result, right? So here you can see the role also has been appropriately displayed. Okay, so based on the data that we have passed to this element, right, appropriately, right, so we have passed some data as props. So from that user details, the component has been rendered, right? So when we want to create a different user profile, we can appropriately send that data and we can render that. So here this user profile is actually a reusable component. So based on the data that we send appropriately, the user profile will get created. Okay. So this step is also done and we were able to see this output, right? So here there's one point to note that when we were running this, right, we got compiled with warnings. So let's try to resolve these warnings. So firstly, let's read the warning that is being popped. Okay, so which is image elements must have an alt prop. Okay, so that is a warning. So here basically in the image element that we are writing, right, so there we need to specify the alt prop. Okay, so we have to write alt equal to and we have to provide a string. So there's basically this alt attribute that we are talking about. So this needs to be specified for the image element. Okay, so when we provide a URL, right, so either due to the network issue or if the image URL that we have provided is not proper, so there is a chance that the image is not being downloaded and appropriately displayed, right? So in such scenarios, we need to display some alternate text for that image. Say here we want to display, say avatar, right? An alternate text for that image we want to display. Okay, so for that we need to specify this alt attribute. Okay, so especially in case of these image elements, it's very important that you specify this alt attribute. Okay, so that's the reason we were getting that warning. So once you specify this, so then appropriately the warning will be resolved. Okay, so in case there was a network issue, so then you'll be able to see an output in this manner with the text avatar there you can see, right? Okay, so that's the importance of the alt attribute. Okay, so let's add this. So here for the image element, so here we have to add the alt attribute, so which is an alternate text that we provide for this image. In case of the network issue or in case the URL that we have specified is improper, in such scenarios, so the alternate text will get displayed. Okay, let's call this avatar. Okay, so let's save this and now you can see the warnings have been resolved and we got compiled successfully. Okay, clear? Now let's look at the output. Okay, there you can see the output remains the same. Okay, in case there's a network issue or in case the URL that we have specified is improper, then we'll get that avatar text. Okay, in this manner. Okay, so and you can see the output, it has been appropriately compiled. Okay, so now we are done building a single user profile, right? So now let's render a user list. Okay, a list of user profiles. So for that, firstly, we need to create the user data, right? The list of users data. So there you can see we have user details list. So with the objects related to each of the user profile. So for each user profile, we'll have a corresponding object and then we'll pass this object as the props to the user profile and appropriately the user profile will be created. Okay, so we'll maintain this users data list here in this manner. So instead of having just a single object, now we have an array of objects where each object will be passed to the user profile and appropriately it will get rendered. Okay, clear? So let's do this. First, let's add the user data and we'll go back. Okay, so right now we have a single object. So now what we want to do is we want to have list of user details. Okay, so user details list. Okay, so here this would be an array. So within the array we'll have a list of objects. So let's copy this and we'll add that here. Okay, so there you can see we have added this object, right? So now let's just duplicate these. Let's just add another 3 like this. Okay, so you can actually make use of the data that's been provided in the resources.md and replace the image URLs appropriately. Right now I'm just adding some 4 profiles here. Okay, so then we'll make use of this user details list. Okay, so there you can see we have the user details list. Okay, so the next thing is we have to make a small modification in the user profile component. So right now the user profiles that we are creating, we want to display them as the list items, right? So when we want to create them as list items, so it's better to have them as an li elements than a div container. Okay, so as we previously understood while learning HTML, unordered lists, right? So ul unordered list, where in this we can specify the list of items, right, using the li, right? So we'll do the same thing here. So for that, so rather than having a container element, so it's better to have a list item, right? So that's the reason we are going to modify that as li. So within the user profile component, we'll update that as an li. Okay, there you can see li. Okay, clear? Instead of div, we are just updating it as li so that we can have them as the list items. Okay, so after this, once we update this thing, right? So the next thing is we want to have a list container. Okay, within the list container, we are adding a heading element. So we want to do this. So within the app.js file itself, we'll write that part of code, adding a list container within which we are going to add a heading. Okay, so later on, we'll add the list items also here itself. Okay, so here we need some styling that we want to apply. Okay, so for that, so the styling that we want to apply for these elements, so right now it's an app.js. So let's create a new file app.css in which we'll keep adding the styling that needs to be included here. Okay, app.css, and we are importing that import./app.css. So with this, all the styling that we provide in the app.css file will get included in the app.js. Okay, so you can make use of all the class names that we have specified in the app.css. Okay, there you can see, right? We have a list container and within which we have a heading, right? Appropriately, we have the class names we have specified there. Okay, so let's do these steps and we'll come back. So here within the app.js file itself, we want to create a list container, a heading, and then we'll add on the list items. Okay, so right now we are actually rendering the user profile. Instead of this, we'll add the list container and all those steps. So for that, I'm removing this. Okay, and let me add a div element. So which is the list container. Within this, we want a heading element. So saying users list. Okay, clear? So here for this div container and for this heading, we want some styling to be applied. So let's add the styling into app.css file. Okay, here you can see. So the corresponding classes are already available for you in the resources.md. There you can see app.css. You can just directly copy them. So there you can see the styling. Okay, so I'm just copying that here into app.css file. I'm saving it. So now we have to import this app.css file here so that we can make use of it. So import./app.css. Okay, now we can make use of the classes that we have defined in the app.css file. Okay, so now let's make use of this. Okay, so class name equal to, right? So the name that we want to provide is in the app.css, it's list container. Okay, so let's add that. So here I'm specifying that. Similarly, when it comes to h1, so we want the class name to be equal to, so here in the app.css we have title, so let's just paste that here. Okay, so let's save this. So here you can see it's called failed to compile. So the reason is we are importing it here at the bottom, so it's suggesting us to import it on the top. So let's do that. Okay, generally it's suggestible to have all the imports on the top. Okay, so that's what it was specifying, and then these warnings we'll resolve as we go further. Okay, so we are done specifying this list container and the heading in this. Okay, so these steps are done. As we understood, it's better to have all the import statements at the beginning of the file. Okay, so now next is we want to have the list of user profiles, right? So firstly we'll have an unordered list ul, there you can see. So within that we'll have the list of user profiles. So there you can see we are making use of the user profile component and we are passing the user details from the user details list. Okay, there you can see of 0, of 1. Appropriately the list items will get appended there and rendered. Okay, clear? So here, instead of specifying in this manner, right? So in case if our user details list has exceeded, we keep on can't adding like this, right? So we can make use of the map function. Okay, so within the curly braces, right? So since it's a JS code, so we have to use the curly braces. So within the curly braces, we'll write user details list dot map of, and each item of the user details list will be passed to the callback function. Okay, so there within that, we are going to render the user profile. Okay, we are making use of the user profile component, and then we are providing user details equal to, and we are passing the props data, right? The props. So each item. Okay, so with this, we'll get an output in this manner. Okay, let's give this a try. So here you can see, right? So right now we have the heading. So the next thing is we want the list of user profiles to be added here. For that, we'll make use of the unordered list. And within this, we want the list items. Okay. So basically, we want the list item in this manner. So we have user profile and we want to pass the user details. So to the user details, we already have the user details list, say of 0, of 1, and so on. We want to pass the data in this manner. Okay. So rather than specifying, of 0, and then again, let's say for the next item, okay, let's say of 1 and so on. Instead of doing that, so let's say like this, okay, of 0, of 1, instead of doing this, okay, what we can do is we can make use of the map method. Okay, let's see how to do that. So as we are going to write some JS code, we have to make use of the curly braces. Within this, we'll write, okay, so the list that we want is user details list. So we are going to iterate on that. So, and then in the map, we have to specify a callback function. To this callback, each item of the user details list will be passed as an argument. So then within this callback function, we want to render the user profile, right? So we want to render that. Okay, let's do this. Okay, so since we just want to return this, there's no need of writing this. We can directly just have user profile. So to which we have to pass all these props as the, right? So here we have the user details, which is the each item, right? So we just need to pass that as props. So user details equal to, right? Which now the data is each item. Okay. So in this manner, clear? So there you can see now, right? So here we are making use of the map method. We are iterating over each object in the user details list. So using that each item, we are creating the user profile. We are rendering the user profile component, right? So with this, the list of user profiles will be rendered. Okay. So here we understood, right? This object, just read the warnings. So it's mentioned that user details is assigned a value but never used. So this user details object is being assigned but it's never used. So there's no need of this object anymore. You can just remove it. Okay. So there you can see now it's compiled successfully. In case if you get any warnings or errors, just go through them. Just read it out. You'll be able to easily understand. In case of any queries, you can always approach us through the discussions, right? Okay. So here, now let's look at the output and there you can see, right? We have the user list. And then we have the various profiles. Right now, I've just copy pasted the code. That's the reason it's all pretty there. So appropriately, you can update this and you'll see the result. Okay. So this step is done and we are able to see the list of users, right? In this manner, right? So we are done with the user list application. Okay. Here, there's one point to note. So if you inspect the element, so you'll be able to see a warning in this manner. So let's read out the warning. Each child in a list should have a unique key called keys. So let's understand this. In React, the keys are used to identify the list items to check whether they have changed, added or removed. So whenever you're using lists in React, you have to provide key to uniquely identify the list item. Okay, so whenever you're using lists in React, so you have to provide keys to uniquely identify the list. Okay, so to provide the key, we are going to add a unique number to the object. To each object, we'll add a unique number, which can be used as a key prop for the key. Okay, so there you can see we added unique number. For each of these, we'll add the unique number, and this unique number will be provided to the key prop. Okay, so by specifying the key prop, so for each list item, we are specifying a key using which the React will track the list item. We'll see whether it has been added, whether it has been changed. It will be able to track using that key. Okay, clear? So with this, once you add this key prop for each of the list item, so then the warning will be resolved and you'll be able to see this output, right? Clear? Let's give this a try. So here, so if you inspect the element here, okay, let's do inspect. So here in the console, so here I'll just clear this and again render this. Okay, you can see there is a warning, right? Saying that each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So let's resolve this warning. Okay, clear? So for this, as we understood, so when we are using lists, it's important that you specify the key prop. Okay, so whenever you're using lists, you need to specify the key prop to uniquely identify the list item. So for that, firstly, in the data object itself, let's have a unique number, okay, for each of the object, so which can be passed as the key. Okay, so I'm specifying that for each of these. So say 2, and then now this would be say, so say 2, and then now this would be say 3, right? So another one, say 4. Okay. So we have specified these unique numbers. So this unique numbers would be passed as the key prop. Okay, so in the key prop, we'll specify these unique numbers, each item dot unique number. Okay, so Now, so if you go back into this and inspect the element, so that issue would be resolved. Okay, so there you can see, right? Let's just clear this out and refresh it. So that error will no longer be there. Okay, so in this way we were able to resolve that issue. Okay, so we understood this, right? Okay, so one point to note is we have passed the key prop, but it's not accessible when we are trying in the component. Okay, in the component you cannot access the key prop. There you can see, right? We have key, so you cannot access it even if you try to print the key, so it will come as undefined. Okay, that means that there is no prop like that. So the key prop that we have defined will not be passed to the user profile component. Okay, you cannot access that in the user profile component. Okay, so we understood about the keys, right? So whenever you're making use of list items, you have to mention the key prop. Okay, so coming to another important point, right? So when we are importing the user profile component, so we are importing from a particular path, right? So even if you don't specify the /index, then by default, React will consider the index.js file and will search for the user profile component in the index.js. So if the path that you provide is a folder path, so then by default, it will consider the index.js present in that folder. Okay, so you can just simply write it in this manner. This is just a simplification way of writing it. Okay, so let's try to do this. So here in the app.js file, so when we are importing the user profile, so you need not specify this /index. So if you just provide the folder path by default, so your React will consider the index.js file present in the user profile folder. Okay, so you can just specify in this manner. Okay, even then you'll get the same output. Okay, so you can have a look at it. So localhost :3000 and you'll be able to see this. Okay, so we understood this also, right? Now let me summarize today's session. In today's session,